Welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity, the weekly radio program presented by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. And little by little, I think that phrase is taking on deeper meaning across the United States. Thank you for letting us be in your homes and in your cars this weekend. And, of course, you can find us anytime at tertiumquids.org, the home for the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, online podcasts, white papers, and especially during this period of time, during the Virginia General Assembly, so much of what is going on behind the scenes with an organization that, it may surprise you, has helped some of our legislators craft the very laws that we live by in the Commonwealth. Joining us is the Director of Legislation Reform at Tertium Quids, the great Caleb Taylor. Thank you for joining us, Caleb, and taking a little time out during busy times. How are you, sir?
Thank you so much for having me, Joe.
So,
I'm well.
The General Assembly session, certainly we watched it begin with some curiosity as it was this newly minted, almost 50-50 divided, even through court battles. And my feeling was at the onset that if we came out station keeping, where most everything just sort of kind of got pushed aside, and we got a biennium budget that didn't increase taxes egregiously, that would probably be about par for the course. What has been your impression of the Virginia General Assembly to this point?
Well, I think it's one of those strange times where it looks like everybody in the General Assembly is trying to make a mark. You know, you see that every year. In some respect, with those people that are running for new offices or higher offices than they already hold. But now it's like everybody's running for a higher office. So everyone is trying to make their mark with this kind of new balance. And I'm not sure that it's going to weigh out to any particularly huge changes. I think the only thing that we see that is a major there's a couple of big bills, but the only thing that we see that's a major kind of issue or worry is the expansion of Medicaid. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure how far that's going to go either.
Well, and certainly as we watch the mandates now have been carved out of the federal requirements for Obamacare, I'm sure at some point they'll have to go in and just clean up the legislative provisos that still exist. But little by little, we seem to be getting to a place where even last year, Terry McAuliffe signed in a bill that allowed the direct primary care associations to get started after going back and forth with Delegate Landis on that very issue. And Virginia is now one of the forefront states for those direct primary care associations, and perhaps at the avant-garde of what can supplant Obamacare regarding a citizens-directed and customer-focused medical system.
I think you're absolutely right. I think in the long run, direct primary care is going to be one of the biggest and most important solutions to the healthcare situation in this country. There are actually quite a lot of things that we've been talking about over the last year that we're going to be talking again over this year, including direct primary care, including waivers for charity care doctors, and a lot more that I think you're going to see a lot more options out there for, that kind of peer-to-peer idea in medicine, which I think is ultimately going to make this whole Medicaid thing, worthless. We're not even going to be talking about that anymore. This stuff is really, really exciting stuff in terms of healthcare.
Well, and when you look at some of the stunning numbers that Virginians, especially in central Virginia, are seeing in terms of monthly contributions to insurance companies, and then they can compare it to, well, if I just put this into account that I drive, I'm going to wind up with more benefit and without the bureaucracy of having to plead for some of my money back because it's money that I've held on to. And, maybe we get to a health savings account model where you get to keep that money through your life. So by the time you're 65, Medicare is not even something you have to worry about anymore.
Yeah, and that is what we're hoping. That's what we're pushing for. Any kind of, it's kind of one of the things that keeps us afloat, mentally when we think about, oh no, here comes Medicaid expansion. Well, these peer-to-peer models like HSAs, like direct pay care, these things, I think you're absolutely right. They're going to make Medicaid obsolete, Medicare obsolete, and it's all going to be for the best, not just for the healthcare market, but for the economy in general.
So where do we stand right now with Medicaid expansion? That's obviously something that will come in the biennium. Who do we need to be leaning on legislatively, or is it just a subject of just getting to all of your local delegates, whether it be Sam Rasool or Rob Bell, and find them and try to put some weight on them to make sure that they're not doing something that's going to further bankrupt a system that has grown? I think somebody pointed out it's in dozens and dozens of percentages. It's grown over the last few years anyway. I think over the last 10 years it's expanded 75% over where it was. So it already has been expanding.
Oh yeah, and it's going to continue to. It's just not the kind of model that can maintain competitive costs or anything like that. It's just going to increase. As far as who we need to rely on, you're just what you said. We strongly recommend contacting your representative, contacting your delegate, your senator, and telling them, hold the line, because there are so many bills. We found lines in the budget for $1 billion for the expansion in 2019 and 2020. We've got bill after bill after bill after bill that essentially is an expansion, but refuses to say that it's an expansion. And then we've got bills that say it is an expansion and it's super necessary. And it's just, I've never seen so many Medicaid bills in my life.
Well,
we've even got, and this is one I specifically wanted to talk about with you, was we've even got a bill. It is SB 310, SB 310 in the Senate. That wants to reinstate the estate tax.
I saw that
to pay for it. Unbelievable.
So they're going to take money from the dead people to give it to the hopefully not dead tomorrow people. It seems like it.
Reinstating a tax that we fought tooth and nail to get rid of back in 2006. It's still in the hopper. Let's bring it back. No.
Well, estate tax, it's amazing to me. Estate tax, like some of our legislation regarding the sanctity of life, often revolves around, well, they're not voting anymore, so let's go after them, rather than, looking at the people it does hurt, like family farmers whose, kids can't take over the family farm because they'll be so saddled with debt after the estate taxes are paid that the farm isn't worth it anymore and they have to sell it.
Yeah, and it's one of my favorite old not debates, but I guess speeches or question and answer sessions with Milton Friedman actually talk specifically about the effect of the estate tax or the death tax, where he was very, very clear in saying that, we on the liberty side of things like to talk about this being an individualist society, but it really isn't. It's a family society.
Sure.
And we work really, really hard. I've been Facebook friends with you for God knows how long now, and you work really, really hard to help and provide for your kids. I do the same thing, and that's a massive incentive for Americans. Well, you take that away, and what do you get?
Well, it's like something Ben Franklin once said: if you want less of something, tax it. And I think we're seeing this again as sort of a backhanded. Maybe I'm a little aluminum foil wearing, but when I look at the estate tax, it's just another thing to de-incentivize family, because it says, well, if you do all this and and raise a big family or raise a prosperous family, we're just going to come and take it anyway. So spend it now, and then tap into Medicare later when you need government assistance, and it's a shame because families should be building things and raising one another. We watch it even on our local levels, Caleb, where a family can't parcel out a piece of their property for their son or daughter to build a home on, which was something America was built on, homesteading. And my kids they're going to take this corner of my farm and they're going to build a farmhouse on it, and that's going to be their farm. And the family grew from that. We've de-incentivized so much that is essential into our way of life.
I completely agree. I mean, who would have thought, 50, 60 years ago that people would be talking about incorporating their families just to get past the tax?
Yes,
it just doesn't make any sense. the old homestead and the corporate family.
Yeah, that's right. Thomas's and Taylor's LLC. It is. It's or we set up a 527 so at least we can be politically active.
Can you imagine the Kentucky feuds?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, it's not the Hatfields and McCoys. It's the Hatfields and the McCoys and their attorneys and some tax lawyers as well in the IRS.
We'll see you in court.
That's right. No more sidearms. Now it's yellow briefing pads. Caleb Taylor, who joins us from the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, tertiumquids.org, legislative director. You mentioned something talking about just seeing that bill come up, and we talked at the onset about this now closely divided House where 14 seats changed hands. And I mean, some of the most progressive of progressives, we watched $2 million get spent to divvy up 2,000 votes in Roanoke to put Chris Hurst there and his Bloomberg-sponsored gun-grabbing agenda. We've watched, hardcore. We actually have a member of the Democratic Socialist Party of Virginia in the House of Delegates. So these bills, they're going to become more and more prevalent. But isn't this a great reminder, Caleb, that every election matters? And as we learned in the Norfolk area, every single vote matters, where one vote made the difference in between losing a seat from a conservative to getting, just by the luck of the draw, keeping that seat.
That's right. It's important. It's important not only that people get out there and vote. And I like how most people think that voting is a right. It's not. It's a privilege. Taking advantage of a privilege of living in a republic, one, but two, staying informed. I'm even okay with Democrat voters that are incredibly informed. I love talking to them all the time. I love having debates with them because they tend to be very, very civil. The more informed they are, the more civil they tend to be. But that's important. Stay informed, and then take advantage of the privilege that you get from that you're automatically given upon your birth. Mm-hmm. Well, when you turn 21 or 18. When you live in a republic, that's what you need to do. Stop thinking of it as a right, because we tend to take our rights for granted, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But you mentioned and the responsibility to keep attuned to this. Your emails, and people should sign up for these legislative updates at tertiumquids.org. They come into your inbox, including handy dandy, easy to follow links to the members of the House or Senate that need to hear from you via email. A great way to do it. We're just finishing up National School Choice Week. Virginia, as was warned to me by your predecessor at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, if Virginia did a half-baked version of school choice, they would turn around and then every time it's brought up again claim, but we fixed that already. We've already done that. And we hear that regarding the scholarship program that, quite honestly, I don't think anybody even uses anymore. The same is true for eminent domain. You guys at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, for the most part, really helped the General Assembly craft the very constitutional amendment that was so overwhelmingly supported a few years ago. Yet there are still things to go about, as I read in the updates regarding eminent domain, and still tweaking and fixing around the edges where government insists that what you've worked for is really theirs.
That's right. The eminent domain issue is most certainly not settled. We're still getting really terrible stories of people that have been taken advantage of eminent domain is handled in different ways depending on who the department is that's using it. VDOT uses it differently than the energy lobby, however you wanted to call them, and the so there's a lot still to fight. The one I think that we're specifically paying really close attention to are the lost profits implications of eminent domain.
Oh yes,
and this is all this is just. Is we're trying to update the code and bring the code in line with the constitutional amendment. And there's still people fighting it. There's still people that don't want it to align, that want to take it as long as possible.
Sure.
Most of those special interests, but
well, some of them are taxpayer funded, Caleb. It's the Virginia Association of Counties and the Virginia Municipal League take your tax money from your board of supervisors and your city councils and then spend that money lobbying against your property rights. It's still stunning.
Well, yeah, I've always thought that was kind of amusing that they tax you to steal from you.
Yeah, that's it. And we're supposed to thank them, and then they want to march in the front of the parade. So the calculation of lost profits, it sounds again, and I worry as the General Assembly swung a little bit towards the left this time, that again we're going to vilify business owners. But if you go and take 75% of a business owner's parking lot, it's not just the value of that property. It was one of the things I thought was very brilliant in the constitutional amendment is it would give you that right to fight for those lost profits or that lost access. So we're still fighting that fight, aren't we?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely right, and we'll probably be fighting for the nuts and bolts of this for a couple more years. I mean, we've really moved the ball down the field in a really, really big way. We're not quite to that final touchdown, but we're getting pretty close. So yeah, this is something that we'll be fighting for the next couple of years, but one of the best successes that we've ever been able to talk about, and we're very excited about it.
Now, one that has been as big a part of the Virginia Institute for Public Policy over this time as private property rights and eminent domain reform has been this ridiculous certificate of public need. And every time anyone asks me, well, what is that? I say, well, imagine if you had to get permission from McDonald's to open up a Burger King in your town. And what do you think they'd say? Where do we stand? I know there's a House bill that would sunset that.
Yes, there's a House bill that would sunset that in pieces. So it's not sunsetting the entirety of Certificate of Public Need, but it's sunsetting portions of it at different rates, which we're supporting because there isn't a bill out there to just flat out get rid of it. But ultimately, the goal is to eliminate Certificate of Public Need. The major issue with this, especially it tied in with Medicaid. The issue with the ACA and with Medicaid all the way back to the 1960s, it has been that it dramatically increased demand while at the same time affording nothing to supply for health care. And because it puts dedicated money into the market that cannot be spent on substitutes, cannot go anywhere else, effectively devalues every dollar in the healthcare market to begin with. So that's a problem to begin with. Then you get Certificate of Need that comes in, and Certificate of Need doesn't seem to, its whole goal, it was actually created after Medicaid came in once prices started to skyrocket.
Right.
It was designed to decrease prices. Unfortunately, the politicians or political science majors or whoever you want to talk to that created Certificate of Public Need did not realize that, unfortunately, demand for health care is fairly inelastic, and that means that people, regardless of the price, demand a certain amount of health care no matter what, because it's pretty necessary. So all that did was limit the supply that was going on. So what do you get when you have skyrocketing demand and limited supply? Higher prices.
Surprise! What do you mean?
Surprise.
That's not fair. Those
Welcome
greedy
to Economics 101 in healthcare, and that's essentially what's happening. And Certificate of Public Need is exacerbating the situation. So I think that's going to have to be a core thing that needs to be gotten rid of here shortly, especially for these great market-driven innovations to come through.
Well, again, people don't trust the market, but I think we've learned over the last 4 or 5 years that, especially as we watch tax reform coming out of Washington, that if you allow the market to work, it does really start to work, and hopefully we're going to watch that continue. What have you heard, Caleb, before we finish up, regarding the state taxes? Certainly the left has made a very hypocritical noise over screaming about the federal tax reform being a tax break for the rich, and then out of the other side of the same face complaining that it takes away the deductibility of state taxes, which really only benefits the wealthy in those states because they're generally the ones who itemize. So I only imagine that the budget proposals will try to address something like that.
They, of course, and they'll run those games. But the issue is with anything like this, you have to be able to message it to the people, talk to the people about why this is the case. Mm-hmm. And they've completely jumbled it. And the issue is that people are seeing more money in their paychecks. And if suddenly, and I think even the Democrats, in a lot of ways, that's why we're kind of seeing half-hearted pushes as opposed to like really, really strong pushes for more taxation, although it's coming. We're seeing more half-hearted pushes like this estate tax push because they know, okay, well, if everyone just got a tax break and then suddenly they start losing more of their taxes, they're going to be pretty upset.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see what's
happening.
happening.
And they're going to blame us because we just got into office. So we're not seeing as much like fervor behind that movement, although we will, because we know even if Medicaid is expanded, there won't be enough money to pay for it.
Yeah, and
so more taxes are coming.
Well, and more creative ones. I think more user fees, and we're going to see more and more of this pay-for-play kind of stuff to try to come up with solutions to fund these leviathans that don't actually go out to help anyone. But it's the vote chase that really is what's fascinating to watch because they're very good at making it seem like they care, but they're just chasing votes down the road. Caleb, I hope to hear from you again very soon. We'll check in again before the General Assembly goes into crossover, I'm sure, and to see where we are with a lot of these. But thank you for taking some time out. Again, it's tertiumquids.org. Sign up for the daily email release. Have a great weekend, and thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you so much.
And coming up next, we continue. We mentioned National School Choice Week. We'll visit with some of our friends from the Pacific Research Institute on school choice in America, coming up on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. And joining us as we come to the culmination of National School Choice Week, welcome to the program from one of our favorite places, Pacific Research Institute, and their Center for Education is Lance Izumi. Lance, welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. He's got a new book out called An American Education Agenda. How are you today, and thanks for joining us?
Well, thanks very much, Joe. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Book is on the bookstore shelves. People can order it Amazon and go in there. I don't know if it's on the top in the middle at Barnes & Noble, but certainly get it from them, get it in there. Tell us a little bit. There's much controversy. Perhaps the most controversial bit at the beginning of the Trump administration was the appointment of Betsy DeVos as the chairman of the Department of Education. How has this year been from the federal level, first and foremost, under education in the Trump administration from where you sit?
Well, I think that, there's been, certainly a different tone that has been shown about education issues, especially education reform. President Trump made school choice one of his, big issues during his presidential campaign, and Secretary DeVos has, certainly been using the bully pulpit as secretary to continue to push that, in her speeches throughout the country. I also think that some of the things that are now underway at the Department of Education, I have potential for some really good results. For example, in April of last year, the president asked Secretary DeVos to conduct a review of regulations at the department to see which ones were harmful and should be done away with. And so that review, I believe, should be well underway right now. And hopefully, when they come out with the results, that we'll have a much leaner and more effective department, and hopefully set the stage for even greater slimming in the future.
Now, Lance, your book, An American Education Agenda, one of the reforms that you recommend includes expanding school choice. What is the biggest impediment to it? We here in Virginia have what they refer to as the I refer to as the grandfather of all Blaine amendments, the Virginia Act for Religious Freedom, under which most of the state-controlled school advocates will point to and say, see, we can't give vouchers to parents because that might somehow become taxpayer money going to a parochial program. The argument has been made, I think, successfully in places like Arizona that it's going to the parent. We've seen this in even medical reforms and medical insurance reforms, Medicaid reforms. So is this something that can move forward, the idea that a school voucher goes to a parent and then the parent can do with it as they see fit rather than tripping up these school choice bills under the idea of separation of church and state?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Joe. If you look, you mentioned Arizona, but next door in Nevada, they have an education savings account program, which is a school choice tool where the government puts, funding into individual accounts that parents can access and use for various education expenses, including private school tuition. And Nevada, like Virginia, has a strong Blaine amendment, which supposedly prevents government monies from going to religious institutions. However, the state Supreme Court in Nevada has ruled that the education savings account program in Nevada is okay under the Blaine Amendment because, as you just said, the money doesn't go directly to these religious institutions. It goes to the parents who then make their own independent choice about where that money goes to. And so, therefore, it doesn't run afoul of the Blaine Amendment. Now, of course, that's a state court decision in Nevada, but it does show that these Blaine amendments, which you have more than 30 of those amendments attached to various state constitutions in the United States, that those Blaine amendments shouldn't necessarily be an obstacle for the enactment and implementation of school choice tools.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the Nevada one is close to us. We've become friendly with Scott Hammond, the state senator who had written that bill, and it had been challenged several times in court. Last time it didn't look hopeful for it. Has it survived that court challenge?
Yes, I mean, at least, my last reading of the how things stand over there, it did survive the court challenge, and so, I believe that state Supreme Court ruling upholding the law, at least, against the challenge under the Blaine Amendment, did come down favorably in the latter part of last year.
One of the ironies, and Scott Hammond has been on this program to talk about this, I thought that this was great, but it's a reminder to conservative-minded legislators that after they took the slings and arrows of all the teachers' unions and everyone else, that the line that formed to sign up for their voucher program was full of people who had voted for their opponents, but they were Latino families especially, who either through ESL necessity or their parochial beliefs, their Catholic beliefs, wanted to be able to go to a private institution and perhaps use that as the fulcrum to escape what may be an impoverished situation in Nevada. And I just thought it was a great learning experience for conservative elected officials that sometimes you got to take the heat on the front end and all of a sudden you're winning over your opponent's base, it seemed, in Nevada.
No, I think that's absolutely right, Joe. I mean, if you look at the polling data that's been done across this country, you look at where I'm from here in California, which, most people regard, rightly so, as one of the bluest states in the country, and yet the recent polls last year showed that overwhelming majorities of Californians support school choice vouchers. And, amongst the African Americans and Latino, that number is up to 3/4 of people in those communities that support school choice vouchers. And, precisely because, as you mentioned, they often have to send their children to the schools that are often the worst performing in the state, and they know firsthand that they need those choices. I think that also, too, you mentioned Latinos in, Virginia, or in Nevada, but also, in Virginia and other places, minorities often have to deal with issues not just of poor performance in the classroom, but or teaching and et cetera. But they also have to consider that there's often poor safety conditions for their children. Where you have school crime, gangs. I mean, certainly I know that MS-13 and other gangs are a problem not only in Virginia but across this country.
Yeah.
And so, when you have those types of worries that parents are experiencing, especially in minority communities, you want that exit ticket immediately.
We're talking with Lance Izumi, the author of An American Education Agenda. He's Senior Director of the Pacific Research Institute Center for Education. Some of the, obviously, we talk about Common Core. It hasn't come up much in the last year. What is the status of Common Core? Is it on life support? Is it almost out the door? How are we doing with getting rid of Common Core and what seemingly an A for effort kind of educational system?
Right. I think that, one of the things that, people may have a bit of a misapprehension is that, that Common Core, hasn't been in the news because, the federal government, has said that, well, we're not going to continue to push Common Core, and so therefore then the debate is over. But that's not true, because what happened under the Obama administration was that the federal government did push the states to adopt Common Core, and now you have probably at least about 40 states or so that have Common Core or Common Core type standards and curricula embedded into their systems. And while the federal government may not be, strong-arming states in order to, continue to keep Common Core, it's up to state legislatures and state boards of education, local leaders, to get those Common Core standards and curricula changed and replaced. And so that's, it really becomes now a war, on many fronts at the state level.
Well, you talk about the trickle-down effect. How much can Betsy DeVos, Lance, do at the federal level to encourage some of these reforms? We as conservatives want as little federal involvement in a local issue, even though I saw this horrific program that the University of Salisbury in Maryland is teaching the teachers. This is an elementary educational degree program in which one of the classes teaches something called the Pyramid of White Supremacy. And surprisingly enough, in the middle of it is local. If you advocate for local funding for schools and local management of schools, that's apparently a white supremacist dog whistle there. But really, the communities should be running their schools. How much impact can the federal government have in support of getting rid of these things, or should they just pull it all together?
Well, I think that one of the things that they can do is that look at the federal funding that goes down to states. Is it effective? One of the things that I call for in my American Education Agenda publication is for Betsy DeVos and President Trump to form a national commission that looks at the effectiveness of federal education programs. I used to work many years ago in the Reagan administration, and under President Reagan, you had what was called the Grace Commission that looked at all federal programs to evaluate their effectiveness. We need a similar type of commission, I believe, to independently they look at the effectiveness, and in many cases the lack of effectiveness of federal education programs, and come up with a set of recommendations. And then, you can then move to the next step, which is to, slim down, if not eliminate the Department of Education. We need to have, good arguments and to understand, which programs are working and which are not, and also which ones are perhaps funding, local efforts, state and local efforts that, end up propagandizing both teachers and students. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think is raising its ugly head. Especially now since the 2016 election.
What about the role of the homeschool parents, Lance? It has been an explosion. Homeschooling grows by leaps and bounds. At some of in some of the instances, I've seen Ivy League schools claiming it's the largest, fastest growing part of their incoming freshman classes are homeschool students. And it seems to be the more the government tries to push government-style education, the more and more American parents are saying, nah, you know what, we can do this at home. Let's do this at home. Where do you think this is heading for us?
I think it's only going to get bigger, Joe. I mean, for all kinds of different reasons. I think that, on the one hand, you have parents who are worried about the performance of the local public school and feel as though their kids are, getting short shrift, from the academics in those schools. I think other parents, have, worries, as I mentioned earlier, about, safety concerns for their kids, that sending them to the public school endangers their actual personal well-being. And so, therefore, they don't want to send those kids to those schools. I think there are other parents who are worried, again, about the bias, indoctrination, and, of schools, and that, they're going against the values that the parents and the family hold. And so, therefore, for those and all kinds of other reasons, I think the school choice movement and especially the homeschool movement will continue to grow. And I should add that it's not just, I think a lot of people have this misconception that that homeschooling is just for people who have some religious beliefs, but that's not true at all.
Oh, absolutely.
I know here in California, where I'm from, you have a lot of homeschooling going on in places like the Silicon Valley, which is made up mainly of more liberal/progressive parents, and yet homeschooling has become a large movement in places like that. So I think that you're going to see it only grow over time.
What about, and unfortunately our friends on the left love to grab an individual isolated institute where there are just baffling disconnects between common sense and what winds up happening. But this case with the kids being held and chained up, and I believe it was in California as well, where this couple had obviously lost the grip of their last good marble, and this was how they were raising their children. All you can really do is punish those bad actors and not throw all the rest of the good homeschool parents out with one horrific story, right?
That's absolutely right, Joe. I think you really hit the nail right on the head, is that, yes, people like the organizations such as the teachers' unions and others who oppose any type of school choice options, will glom onto, these really horrific and tragic incidents. But on the other hand, as you rightly point out, that shouldn't mask the fact that, horrific things are happening in the public schools as well. It's interesting that the folks who were involved in that terrible homeschooling incident in California, I believe were named Turpin. There was a actual case that I actually cited in my previous book called The Corrupt Classroom, involving a girl named Lanny Turpin, no relation, I don't believe, but from Alabama, who it was reported to have been, beaten up at her public elementary school, and both, school officials at various levels had lied to the parents about, the fact that she was beaten up, and that the perpetrator was supposed to be punished and ended up not being punished. So the parent, because she was fearing for the safety of her daughter, pulled her Lanny out of the school in order to homeschool, because that was the only option available to her, rather than sending her to a dangerous environment where she couldn't rely on school officials to protect the safety of her child.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, are you going to deny that option to that parent given that type of circumstance? I mean, I don't think that most Americans would agree with that.
Absolutely not. Lance Izumi is the author of An American Education Agenda. I want to ask about this because it's in Virginia. I was warned when the General Assembly came up with what I consider a kissing your sister style education reform. We have something that bears some similarity to Florida's school choice system. There is a tax-exempt scholarship fund where if a corporation gives money to the scholarship fund, they get a tax break. And then if the parents qualify for the program, then they can use that money for tuition. And it seems just like it's something to say there's a school choice program, but there isn't really one. And it's been very hard since they instituted this to get the General Assembly to address school choice, Lance. What should we be doing with this? Is there a way to reform this so it will work? Because it just seems like it's another way for the government to control education while making it look like school choice.
Well, and I think that this is one of the issues that, and I'm not totally familiar with the Virginia program, but I will say, just generally speaking, is that, sometimes what happens is that, governments will enact and implement so-called school choice programs, which really benefit just a very, very small slice of kids and parents, and then believe that, okay, they've done their school choice duty and they don't have to think about it anymore. And
that's us.
And what that does is that it leaves 90% plus of parents out in the cold who still continue to have no choice. I know that in Virginia you have a very weak charter school law, and that there are I believe less than 10 charter schools in Virginia.
The charter schools in Virginia have to be started by the local school boards. So, I mean, how is that a charter school?
Exactly, and and so therefore you have just a very few kids who are able to take advantage of these charter schools, and that, of course, is a disincentive for really high-performing charter school organizations like KIPP and other types of management organizations to come into Virginia, and which is really a shame given the fact that I believe your charter school law is now about 20 years old, and you still have like 9 or 10 charter schools in the entire state.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's establishing one charter school every other year.
And sometimes less than that. Now, I came from Pennsylvania, where it seemed like they had a voracious charter school program, and part of it seemed, was driven on the idea that you didn't have to be a teacher to teach at the charter school. So if you wanted to get somebody to teach science and get kids excited about science, you could conceivably hire the proverbial rocket scientist who's devoted their life to the discipline, and at least they're bringing the zeal for the curriculum into the classroom.
No, that's absolutely right, and I've written in the past about this whole issue about who is allowed to teach in classrooms. I mean, the federal government and others, have viewed the so-called teaching credential as equivalent to being a high-quality teacher, and that's absolutely not true. If you look at the research that's been conducted, having a teaching credential by itself, doesn't improve student performance. I mean, you mentioned the proverbial rocket scientist. I mean, if you think of somebody like the Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, he often said during his lifetime that he couldn't go and teach a high school economics class because he didn't possess a teaching credential.
Right.
And yet, here was somebody that should have been in front of as many kids as possible. And so, I think that what is needed is to look not just at pieces of paper, whether it's a credential or whether it's a master's degree or something like that, and look at whether these people have the type of actual background learning that is necessary to improve the performance of kids.
Lance, from your lips to our legislators' ears. And again, boys and girls, come to tertiumquids.org. Sign up for our agenda letters. We push this stuff every day while the General Assembly is in session. And unlike California, that's only a few months out of the year, Lance. So we have to take our shots while we can. But I do appreciate it. Your book is up, and we should mention Milton Friedman thought so much about education that at the end of his days as an economist, he said, I'm starting an education foundation, and the Friedman Foundation, like the Pacific Research Institute, are at the avant-garde of pushing for parental choice, parental control, and school reform. And because I don't think there's anything more important. As somebody asked me what the most important subject is to teach in school, I said reading, and because everything's written in a book somewhere, and kids can go find it there. Last, real quick, do I have time for one real? Ted Cruz announced something on the budget reform bill that I think may have gotten vetoed out, but it was the idea of turning the 529 savings programs towards elementary school kids as well. Have you heard anything about this?
Yeah, I mean, I have. I believe that may have still been included in the tax bill, but I believe that it still was.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, Lance. Again, it's pacificresearch.org. An American Education Agenda is at the Barnes & Noble and the bookstores near you, Amazon.com. Have a great weekend, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much. And they can also get it at our website, www.pacificresearch.org.
Thank you, sir, and have a great time. Thank you. And thank you for listening to Freedom and Prosperity Radio for all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas. Until next week, so long, and thanks for all the fish.